Good afternoon. I'm Yomika Bennett, Executive Director of the New York Charter School Association. Welcome to our weekly Tuesday webinar. We'll start today with some updates before we introduce our esteemed panelists. Mark your calendars for our deep dive webinar this Thursday at 4 p.m., which will focus on remote hiring in partnership with Selected. I also want to let you know that hundreds of people joined us last Thursday to discuss the Board of Regents and in particular, their recent decision regarding BuffSci, a K-12 charter school in Buffalo. Newspapers, radio programs, and of course social media have taken notice, and people are rallying in support. It's important to keep up the effort to fight for BuffSci and to speak out for all charter schools. So please take to social media, send emails, even make phone calls. They all make a difference. It's BuffSci today. Don't let it be another school tomorrow. It's time to raise our voices to support good schools. Visit the Action Center to get involved and stay involved. As you may recall, we shared an update last week on the postponement of revised budget projections, including the potential for 20% cuts that the governor has forecasted in the absence of federal funds. It looks like any potential cuts are now projected to not take place until late June at the earliest. The uncertainty around the cuts and besides being anxiety-inducing, makes planning, we understand it, exceptionally difficult. Without confirmation, though, from New York State Division of the Budget, we cannot say what the cuts would be, how the charter tuition payments would be affected, or whether there would be any cuts at all. So if we are successful in supporting the governor's call for federal aid to New York State, the cuts might be avoided, and that's something important to remember. So what we could do in the meantime, as I said before, I urge everyone to take the opportunity to participate in the fundnewyorkschools.com outreach effort to support, to urge federal elected officials to support New York State schools. We need that federal aid. If you send an email, you can send another one. Take the social media, share the word. Again, please visit the Action Center, share that link with others. Do what we can, do what you can. The ability to influence federal funding has direct impact on whether or not or how significant cuts to education may be. Some schools have reached out to ask if we would address their parent groups to tell them about Fund New York Schools and how we can help do that. We are happy to present to your schools, your parent groups, whomever you'd like to let them know about the Fund New York Schools effort. Please just ask. Finally, I want to share a new resource for you available on our website to review summer resource options. The link is in the chat. We know many of you are determining what to make available to parents and families during the summer, and we hope these resources may be helpful in providing families options to keep their students engaged without placing too much of a burden on your staffs. We know you or your staffs have already been going above and beyond this year. We think these resources will be great help and a win-win for all. We will continue to add to this page, so if you have any resource suggestions to share, please let us know. Okay, with that said, today I am joined by Susie Carello, Executive Director of the SUNY Charter Schools Institute, David Frank, Executive Director of the Charter Schools Office at NYSED, Angeli Matos, Executive Director and Policy of Operations at New York City Department of Education, and Aaron Cochran, Managing Director in the same office, as well as Corey Callahan from the New York City Charter Center. First, we'll hear from our authorizers and ask some questions that we've received in advance. If you have questions, please post them in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. So, welcome, panelists. Good to have you as always. David, Susie, and Aaron, we're going to start with you. Do you have any updates before we turn to the questions? We'll start with David.
Sure. Well, always a pleasure to be with everyone, although I do wish I can see you. It's very hot today in Albany, and since my hair hasn't been cut in a while, it's very frizzy. So you'll have to pardon me today. I have a lot of updates today, a little hodgepodge of a little of this and a little of that. Some schools may have inadvertently received a memo from the state ed department, continuity of learning plan updates. That is not applicable to charter schools. It's only applicable to district schools, although we do hope that you'll work with your authorizer to update those continuity plans. The SED memo is not applicable to you. Actually, through the survey that the authorizers did with Credo, we actually were able to collect a lot of the information that you would have had to put into those plans. And so it saved you the time and effort. So that's a plus. And we're very happy with the response rate of the survey. We only have a handful of schools that haven't completed it. It's still not too late. So if you haven't completed the survey, reach out to your authorizer or to our partners at Credo. They'd be happy to help you to help finish the survey. Next week, I might reach out, I might say the names of the schools that didn't participate. So make sure that you guys did that, and a little suspense. We received a lot of questions about the coronavirus pandemic electronic benefit transfer. These are federal CARES Act dollars that will be going to every child in New York State. It's about $5.70 for every meal that they missed under the pandemic, which equates to about $420 a student. It's going right from the state to the students. Good news, charter schools that participate in the federal school lunch program, whether it's through your school food authority like the New York City DOE, or those schools that are their own school food authority, you'll be eligible for those funds. Just make sure that all of your student records in ATS are up to date if you're in New York City, and if you're not, make sure that your student records are up to date with your RIC. That's what the state will be using to send these funds out to your students. There are about 3 data elements that the state does not have for charter schools, and our child nutrition office will be reaching out to you directly. So sit tight, there's nothing that you need to do right now, but we're glad that charter school students, about 80% of charter school students are economically disadvantaged, so this really will be helpful to those families. And although all students will be eligible for these funds. We also, as you might have seen from the emails that you got, but the state ed department did post the 2020-2021 charter tuition numbers, and you can go to the state ed website in order to find out what your tuition will be, the per pupil tuition for next year. Although I would put an asterisk next to those tuition numbers and refer back to Yomika's statement at the beginning that we hope that those numbers will stand, but ultimately that is at the whim of the economy, and hopefully the state doesn't need to make any additional cuts. We'll keep our fingers crossed for that. I do know that we've received a few questions about the per pupil funding and how those numbers are derived. I haven't finished my PhD in mathematics yet, so we're going to actually, the State Association will be providing more information, and we're going to do some PD around that. It'll give me some time to brush up on quantum mechanics. We also, as you might have heard, the governor made some mention about re-entry plans, and there'll be additional guidance coming out regarding the qualifications for re-entry in June. And then we've been speaking among the authorizers, although we don't know what the requirements for those re-entry plans will be yet. We most definitely will be requiring re-entry plans. At least I can speak for the Board of Regents. We will be requiring re-entry plans for all Board of Regents authorized charter schools, and we think that it's good practice. And then we also know that many of you are preparing for summer school, particularly our high schools. Some of your students might not have received enough credits to graduate this year, and we are developing a summer school memo that will allow for makeup credit and initial coursework that will be released soon. So for our overage undercredited high schools, our traditional high schools, more information is forthcoming. So I would just ask that you hold tight, and we want to make sure that we're providing flexibility so that if you do provide summer school remotely, that your students can get credit for the work that they're doing and graduate and go on to college and career. So hold on for more information regarding that. Also, we sent out an email that there's a lot of information for your juniors who are rising into become seniors to apply for financial aid for college. And the email we sent out to the charter school listserv talks about a information that we're requesting so that we can get you information from the New York State Higher Education Services Corporation. It's the email where you can send your contact information is finaidinfo, finaidinfo @niced.gov. And that was an email that I sent earlier today. In addition, we're looking to help celebrate the great work of your students as they graduate. And so the State Ed Department is looking for pictures of graduating classes. I just sent that email before this webinar. You can send pictures to nygraduates2020 @niced.gov. And there's a lot of information on the file size and things of that nature. So look out for that email as well. I also would say thank you for bearing with us as we send out lots of information. We always think it's better to overshare than undershare. So if you have any questions, we look forward to answering them. And I'd pass it along to the next person.
Okay, great. Erin, do you want to have an update?
Nothing really to add to what David was sharing. I think we're waiting clearly for a lot of guidance from the state. I do want to just clarify the piece about the ATS addresses for the food benefits. We know that a lot of families have relocated temporarily outside the city for this period. And so we would encourage you to make sure that ATS is up to date with their permanent address, not a temporary address. Especially if a temporary address is outside the city, that may impact your billing. I don't know, possibly it may impact the student's ability to be eligible for these benefits. So if you have unique situations, definitely reach out to us at charterschools@schools.nyc.gov and we can help troubleshoot. We just want to make sure that ATS is reflective of a student's permanent address, and presumably a student would have mail forwarding set up so that they could eventually get those benefits. That's all I have.
Okay, great. Thank you. Susie, would you like to provide an update?
Wanted to say welcome to after Memorial Day. Hope everybody had a lovely break together. We were busy at the Institute gathering and analyzing all of our schools, gave us additional data through a series of phone calls in the week before Memorial Day. So thank you again for that. We are sifting and sorting through all of that. Have determined just to add to the conversation a little bit. Of course, now I'm getting that my internet connection is unstable, but to add to the conversation just a little bit, we really appreciated understanding what schools were able to do, beyond the first 2 weeks of the pivot. And out of that, hope to be sharing out what some best practices are so that as we are all waiting to understand what the required elements of a continuity of education plan would look like for the fall, or a reentry plan would look like for the fall, that we are able to give some guidance around the best practices that schools have been able to put in place.
Okay, great. Thank you. So now we'll go to some questions that we received in advance. So we'll start with one question that we received, which relates to remote summer school, and in particular credit recovery programs that high schools offer. The concern we've heard is that remote education does not allow you to accrue credits in New York. How does that work in the context of credit recovery and remote summer school? David, for representing SED, I guess we'll have to go to you. Could you speak to this first?
Yeah, so I addressed that in my remarks before. We think that these are different times, and we want to make sure that coursework that you're doing with your students will count towards graduation requirements. So the State Ed Department is developing an updated summer school manual that would allow for making up credit through online coursework. More information will be coming out shortly, but it's something that we're working on both internally at SED, but also with the executive.
Great, thank you. We'll turn to Erin. Do you want to add anything to that?
Nope, nothing to add.
Okay. And Susie, I'm going to look for a thumbs up for you if you want to add to that. If not, I'll just keep going. All right, very good. So another theme of questions we received is related to the recently announced EBT food benefit for all students in New York City. You touched on that a little bit. But as well as students in other districts who are eligible for free meals, including schools who participate in the community eligibility option, where all students receive free meals and do not individually qualify as being eligible for free meals. It is our understanding that all schools are automatically enrolled in this program, which is being administered by OTDAS, which is the Office of Temporary Disability Assistance. And OTDA has a wonderful FAQ we posted already in the chat. But I want to give you an opportunity for each of you to follow up. We're already receiving questions, follow-up questions on that when we mentioned earlier. And so I just want to give you another moment to follow up on that. We'll start this time. We will start with Erin.
Nothing to add there. I would just add, I think that we know that the turnaround between when we get the request for the addresses in ATS and when we have to send them to the state is going to be very, very quick. So please don't wait for us to ask you for accurate addresses. This is that request, and I think just always mentioning that it's always a good practice to make sure that your ATS addresses are up to date and that they match your own student information system.
Okay, great. Susie, you want to add anything to that by any chance? Okay, no problem. David, we're going to follow up that question with you then.
So if your families do have any questions, I did repost that link in the chat, so they certainly can reach out to the Office of a Temporary Disability. These funds are not just for schools that are their own school food authority. They're for all students who are attending a school that's part of the National School Lunch Program. And so it'll be for all of those students. We're working with districts, as I said, across the state.
I'm going to break protocol here and dive in and clarify. My understanding is that it is for all students if a school participates in the community eligibility or the community eligibility option. But if not, it's only for students who are eligible for free meals.
Yeah, so my apologies. It's students who attend a school implementing a national school lunch program and who are free or reduced price lunch eligible prior to school closure for COVID-19, including charter or non-public participants. So you're absolutely right.
Yeah, and including schools
that are community eligible.
That are community eligibility who might have students who would not otherwise receive free meals. Those families will still also receive this benefit.
Yes, and the state does consider those schools 100% eligible.
Yes.
So we're working with districts and we're reaching out directly to those districts who participate in the CEP program, which is the Community Eligibility Program. If a charter school is under a district, then the district is responsible for providing us with the enrollment data for the purposes of this program. And if a charter school is their own SFA, then we'll take the information from ATS or from your RIC if you're outside of New York City, except for 3 data elements, and then we'll reach out to you directly. So as Erin said, in the meantime, school staff should encourage families to participate in meals being offered daily through the state at grab-and-go locations. Your school should be updating your information in ATS or through your RIC to make sure that addresses are correct. And otherwise, then money will go right to the students. It will not go to the school. It goes right to the student and their families. Thanks for that clarification, Anna.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Service wonk.
All right. Following up on that certification, that discussion we had last week, David, is the COVID certification available on the Teach site, and how does someone apply? For example, do they need to apply for the normal certification first?
That's a great question, Yomika. It's not one that I have an answer to, but I will endeavor to get an answer. I think that that's a great, this is a great opportunity to reiterate that we hope that we use these conversations as an honest dialogue between you as schools and us as authorizers. And I know Susie and I and Erin and I have spoken about this a few times, but we are just normal mortals like the rest of you. And so, I hope that we've made sure that we're approachable. Certainly, we are not without error, as Anna just pointed out. And so we hope that you will not be shy in asking questions. We won't be shy saying we don't have the answer. The worst thing is that we'll come and go back and get it for you next week. So I know that some of these questions we aren't able to answer just because of time limitations, but I know that Yomika and Anna, as well as Corey, and sometimes Randall when he's on, do their best to make sure that we get to every question when time permits.
All right, great, thank you. And finally, before we turn it over to the Q&A to take additional questions, I'd love to get each of your thoughts on the comments the governor made last week about the guidelines for reopening schools being available in early June, which schools would need to use to create a return to school plan, which would then be submitted and reviewed for approval in July. We received a lot of questions about PPE, social distancing requirements, what to do if parents decide not to send students back to schools right away, and many more. Knowing that no one has specific answers to detailed questions of what will be required for reopening, can you each please share your thinking on this as it stands now? And Erin, we'll start with you.
So I think that in general, and I think David and Susie have mentioned this, that flexibility is just going to be the name of the game while we wait for all of the clarifications that we are looking for. So I don't have anything to add here other than to encourage a lot of flexibility in your thinking and to look for more guidance.
All right, great. David?
I would agree that schools should plan for the unplannable. You should have multiple scenarios, whether we come back fully remote, partially remote, or don't come back at all. How do you develop relationships with students? How do you start the school year in a non-traditional way? And it's good to lay out the different scenarios and think about how you're going to provide professional development for your teachers and supports as they start the 2021 school year. We also, I think it's also important to learn from your peers, learn from your colleagues, talk to other schools about what they're doing. I actually, I had a great conversation with Voice Charter School this morning about the work that they're doing to prepare for the unknown challenges that they're facing, as well as how they're preparing for the fall. So I will, I'll put that in the chat over there. You can take a look at my conversation. But ultimately, it's just preparation, preparation, preparation. And as soon as we have more information, we will certainly share it. I can guarantee you that there's nothing that we know or don't know that we're not going to share with you. There's certainly a lot we don't know, but we're going to share everything that we have with our schools.
We'll have a future webinar where we'll ask the authorizers to expound exclusively on all of the things they do not know.
Oh my gosh. There better be a lot of festive beverage availability for that particular one, I can say.
It'll be like an extra credit webinar.
Yeah, there you go. Hopefully with a more identifiable supply line at this point. I will say that I am, constantly raising my hand, like you are, at all of our schools, kind of asking questions about what SUNY knows about supply line availability, All of the different campuses across the SUNY system are facing much of the same challenges. And so I am in lots of conversation, but don't have lots of answers, as David indicates, yet about where all of the PPE will come from. But I know that's first and foremost on everyone's mind. The governor's been pretty clear in terms of the metrics for all of the stages of reopening that those kinds of issues are part of the answers that must happen before we can get to level 4 of reopening. I may have the terminology of his levels inaccurate, but you know, I know they are seeking answers because it is in the best interest of every New Yorker, right, to return to life in a way that is healthy and safe. And so that is in everyone's interest. We continue to ask those questions. And I'll just underscore, we talked a little bit a while ago about multiple budget scenario planning, certainly with, you know, kind of not being sure about what cuts may come in June or may not come in June. Similarly, you know, there are kind of 3 scenarios that seem to clump together. Again, you know, what are best practices? Should instruction need to stay remote for part or all of the year next year? You know, what are we learning? I am reading everything I can about what they're learning in Europe with schools recommencing there, how the different strategies schools are using there in terms of staggered instruction, et cetera, or attendance. And then any return protocol, obviously. Also, I've started to talk to people about planning out the first 6 weeks of school with your kiddos, to, just as you always plan those out, to put in place the rituals and routines of your school culture, and how schooling works for you. The culture of bricks and mortar school now is going to change. And so really thinking critically and carefully about the very detailed plans that you need to put in place when you've got, you know, young kiddos or older kiddos with hand sanitizer or masks. What are the kinds of curriculum practice again and again, rituals and routines? Many of you come up with much more clever things than I can with regard to making those kinds of requirements stick in the brain and the habits of any kind of learner, adults and children. And so I've started having those conversations with some of you to think about, what are you going to do the first day? How are you going to reinforce all of those things? How are you going to create a common set of expectations and reinforce, just like you do for all of the other challenges school takes on?
Great, thank you. That wraps up the questions that we have in advance, and I'm going to turn it over to you for any questions in the Q&A.
Great. So one, as an extension of what you all just shared, and so I'll ask it thinking I know what the answer is, but also as an opportunity to let folks know. So the question is around availability and mechanisms for acquiring PPE. Will they either be sourced by the state, by the New York City DOE, by districts? Will they be funded for? And I think people are actually particularly concerned about sourced because issues of access. And this is where I will quickly say that we have through a partnership program that we have with Staples, we actually do have access for hand sanitizer and masks for schools. And so if that's something that you're interested in, please let us know, and we're happy to connect you. The availability is always changing, but the feedback that we've gotten from schools so far is that the people haven't gotten the answer that the availability is 0. So please reach out to us if that can be helpful. But Susie, David, Erin, any crystal ball gazing, maybe magic 8-ball shaking about that topic in particular? Seeing Susie says no. No.
We'll keep chasing down an answer to it. Don't think that, I mean, I'm sure, I know from other conversations that the authorizers have together, this is a constant question that we are trying to find the answer to, one that will be accurate. But my crystal ball remains fuzzy on this. My apologies, but I'm not giving up.
Same. Great. Thanks to you all. So another question is actually around regents for 2021. And the question specifically is both about when will we know, which I will ask folks, I know that that might be a similar through a glass darkly kind of answer, but also how does that impact, or that uncertainty impact, how people should be thinking about standards for next year? So even if schools were to know, for example, tomorrow, that the regents were not going to be issued for all of 2021, what guidance would you give them? And I'll broaden it beyond just the regents and high school state tests broadly. How should schools be thinking about standards for next year?
I think regardless of whether or not there's an external standardized assessment, that your school should still be working towards the goals of your charter, which are to prepare students for what lies beyond the four walls of your school and preparing them for college or career, even if they're now, we're so happy we have so many UPK charters that have UPK, and that starts with those 3 and 4 year olds. And so we hope that schools will be thoughtful about how they're closing out this academic year to help celebrate all the knowledge that your students have gained, whether that's English and math, or whether those are life skills and knowledge about themselves or their community. We also hope that you will take this time to think about what interim assessments you're using as a school to measure the efficacy of your academic program, to see if teachers are implementing the standards that are part of their scope and sequences or their curriculum, your school curriculum, and everything from the micro to the macro. This just shouldn't be something that you do once a year or twice a year or 3 times a year with the regents, but something that you're doing on an ongoing basis. It shouldn't just be big D data, but we hope that schools use little d. And then, not to plug it too much, but I did touch upon this with my conversation with Voice today, and I feel like I'm selling something. But if you check out the conversation, and it is a little long, it's about 45 minutes, but we talk about the work that they're doing at Voice, and I know that Voice is not alone. That we have lots of schools. I've spoken before about West Buffalo Charter School that we think is doing a great job, and Buffalo Academy of Science is doing a great job. So lots of schools across the state. I think I know all of you on this webinar know what the best educational practices are, and that doesn't change because we're in a pandemic.
I'm happy to go next unless Aaron has a burning desire. I will echo everything what David has said. I think in this amazing lift that you all are doing currently, there has been some laser-like focus on particular curricular areas. That'll be one of the pieces that I know will come through in what we will ask for any future plan, if it includes some sort of blended learning piece. And you have also many of our schools, I don't have the number off the top of my head, we'll know more when we get the Credo data across all of the schools, but many of you have put in place an amazing amount of synchronistic learning on a daily basis, which again, given the time frame in which you have established all of this, is super. I think the assessment question is one that would be a really great content area as we think about the future Thursday webinars and the expertise of many of the schools that David mentioned, and across all of the authorized schools in the state. There are some really great examples of what assessment is looking like, ranging from regular end of course or end of unit assessments that schools are doing, along with, even though I saw a question in the chat about NWEA and not giving it remotely, and we understand and can talk through what some of the challenges are for using web-based remote assessments. But we've had a number of schools that have gone ahead and administered mock regents or mock SAT subject area exams that have been put together from released items that they might have used with students to prepare for the real exams if those were available this year. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity, as David says, to structure some high quality ways to measure the attainment of knowledge and skills that your students might be able to demonstrate on traditional curriculum. And I have a sense of possibility about all of the things your students are learning by being home in this time. And if they are home over the summer, one of the great things about this weekend was that I was able, in an appropriately masked and socially distanced set of conversations, to learn many details about how clever children are in terms of gaming, Google Docs. I sign in, I type my name, I submit it, and my teacher thinks I'm done. And this is not a charter school student, but it took a little bit of time for the teacher to actually contact the parent and say, I have a lot of documents with your child's name. So in any case, I think there are a number of those kind of interesting skills kids are learning too. And I have a sense of possibility you'll help us figure out how to capture that.
Thanks. Erin, anything to add?
No, I think David and Susie captured it really well. Nothing to add.
Great. So last question before I turn it over to Corey and Anjali. And I recognize for some folks that means that there are some questions that are hanging out there. We try to be strategic and not ask questions to which we know that there are currently no answers. But I think a couple that are coming through and some that we have heard asked in the past are around the status of student enrollment in the fall, especially if a student has moved out of state temporarily, given the current context, or if we reopen in the fall and schools are entirely remote and either a student is either new or continuing, but they never physically reestablish their attendance in the school, which often is a signal of enrollment, if only for the school, if not also for the purposes of registration and billing. So any thoughts about that from any of you?
I would recommend that you confer with your legal counsel and follow the regulations. I'd say as a rule of thumb, you're looking for the student's permanent address, and that's the standard by which you bill. But it's a very, very touchy subject, and I would just make sure that as districts still can request residency determinations, particularly those, I don't think New York City does this, but certainly upstate districts routinely conduct residency determinations. You need to make sure that you still are able to produce those documents and are able to tie a student back to that permanent address for your kiddos.
Susie, Erin, any other thoughts? All right. Corey, Anjali, I will hand it off to you all for DOE, New York City DOE specific questions and answers.
Great. Thanks so much, Anna. Good afternoon, everyone. Wanted to start with Anjali and I were speaking before this session kind of about the buckets of questions, and Yomika touched on this in our opening too. There are definitely a lot of questions that we are consistently getting, whether it's on this forum or through email or on DOE's Google Doc, that we really there are no answers for. And I think some of that is because DOE is waiting for guidance. As Yomika mentioned, there's some state guidance that we are now anticipating coming out in June. Districts will be submitting plans for reopening in July. And so we kind of just wanted to caveat that we hear your questions. We don't want you to think that Anjali and her team have not seen them, but just in terms of, specific questions around the DOE calendar, what is some of the services that every charter is able to access in New York City, such as school food, nurses, Metro cards, busing. How is MTA going to ensure that it's safe for students to travel? All of these are to come. And so just wanted to kind of frame that, and please make sure that you submit your questions so we can add it to the list. But for today and potentially for other weeks, there's just not going to be any answers on that. But we will continue to talk about it and answer the questions. And even if it's to say that there are no answers right now. So with that, I will turn us to a topic where Anjali has a couple more answers, and that is referring back to something we talked about last week, which is summer. And so Anjali, I'm gonna have you, I'll start with the question of, this one has been asked several times, will charters have access to DOE summer school as they have historically in the past?
Thank you, Corey, and hi everyone. Good afternoon. Happy Tuesday. All right, so the first thing that I'll say is that we're still working through the logistics of how this is going to work. As you can recall, there was a paper or a paper form rather that families had to fill out and submit to district schools to participate in their summer programs. And we obviously have to rethink how we manage that process. We are, however, working through how to allow charter school students to participate in summer school programs, remote programs provided by district schools. This, just like in the past, will be based on availability, even in the remote platform. So we're working through how that looks like, given that, there's still a lot that is being worked through in terms of how many seats, are going to be available per school, how many staff members are going to be managing these programs. There are a lot of unknowns still, but we do want to make, to the extent possible, we want to make this resource available to charter school students that need it. So more to come on the details, but in short, yes, if available.
And Anjali, I would assume that any announcements about this application process will be in C-Weekly when they're available?
100% right. So we'll send a message in C-Weekly. I am, I'll say this, it's May 26th, and this is approaching very quickly. We're hoping to do this like in the next 2 weeks or so. So keep an eye on C-Weekly.
Also in the summer, last week you had mentioned that rec centers would be open for the employees of essential workers, but you were not yet sure about the school food grab and go being available to New York City students. Do you have any updates on that?
We do. We do have an update. So there will be grab and go sites available. We have, our understanding at the moment is that the sites may change. There may be a reduced number of sites, et cetera. So we'll come back and share those updates when they're available.
And then the last question I do have to ask, because as you mentioned, it is May 26th. When will charters be able, and this is for schools that are co-located, receive from DOE the access to buildings that I know they've been looking for guidance on to close out the school year, to differentiate this from just the access that you guys currently have where people can apply to pick stuff up?
Mm-hmm. That's right, Corey. So we're working on a guidance document for end of year closeout. That's what we're calling it. And this is forthcoming. I don't have a timeline on this, but I want to share that we understand that some schools end mid-June-ish. So we are trying to move quickly. So more details to come.
The next bucket of questions that we always get around are special education. And again, I know that most of you know that DOE offers every 2 weeks special education office hours. I think this week is an off week. Is that right, Anjali?
That's correct.
Okay, so next Thursday. But just as an update, some of the news that came out last week was that the devices for students with IEPs in a New York City charter school, all of them are eligible to receive. Are there devices left for families to receive if they have not yet filled out the application?
I don't have that number available, Corey, but I can check and get back to the group. while we're on this topic, Corey, I do want to announce we received an email an hour ago or so that there are a number of families that are, what's it called? A number of families that we've shipped devices to that have been returned now for a third time. So I believe we have about 30 students. We're going to reach out to schools specifically just to try to get those families those devices. And Corey, regarding your question, like, are there devices left? TBD, I don't know the number, but for those schools that have reached out to us asking about the families that were denied and whether those families were, contacted to now be given devices since they are now eligible. I know that outreach has now occurred, and we are in the process of, packing, shipping those devices.
Okay, great. Another question about the devices. Will families be expected to return these devices to the DOE at any point?
It is our understanding that at this moment, we are not going to collect the devices as long as we're doing some remote learning. And I know that we can expect some remote learning in the fall. So I don't think they're going to be collected for a while, Corey.
Got it. And then another question, and this one I know comes up in your office hours, but just so that everyone on this call has the benefit, has there been any update to the paraprofessional guidance in terms of charter schools being able to use paraprofessionals for students with disabilities?
No updates yet. However, we have not, we continue to work towards sort of publishing this guidance. We know it's June, but again, we anticipate some remote learning in the fall. So we're working towards finalizing that guidance.
Great. Next bucket is finance. We always get finance questions. This one is about billing cycle 1. We all saw last week that the per pupil amounts were announced for all across the state, but in particular for New York City, and your portal opened for billing cycle 1. Given that there was 2 days, maybe not even a day and a half delay, is that going to impact DOE's ability to make on-time payments for the first week in July for New York City charter schools?
Not at the moment. So we are working very hard right now to move our process forward as planned. Right now we have about 36 schools that have submitted their invoice. So if you haven't done so, please submit your invoice. You do have until June 1st. We extended the deadline by a day. So yes, at this point we don't anticipate any delays. But if anything changes, we will keep you posted.
Okay. And then lastly, any updates on guidance that you have for the schools about the reconciliation period in July for the end of this year billing?
No updates yet, but we're working closely with David and his finance team to pin that down hopefully soon.
So I'll take some questions now that are posed in the Q&A. The first is, will the DOE end of year closeout also include when auditors might be able to access co-located space to finish an audit?
We've raised that question internally, Corey, and we're getting a final answer on this, but we're not sure right now. But we have expressed that this is a requirement that every school will have, most likely, and we hope to come to an agreement. Of course, working closely with the principal and the school leadership to allow for retrieval of documents, software, whatever is needed.
Got it. And I'll just add on that, Anjali, the guidance that is going to be coming out, will there be any guidance specific to students being able to get their belongings, or teachers collecting students' belongings and distributing that?
That is, that's part of our plan. That's part of the plan right now, Corey. And as you all could imagine, that is very difficult. We've heard from schools and from others that there are lockers and the students need to go and retrieve their materials from lockers, and that it would be very difficult for schools to manage this on their own without having parents or students go pick up their materials. So we are considering a process right now, and sort of working through the logistics of how this can be managed. Of course, we would have to implement like social distancing if we do allow this. So more to come there. It's going to have to be really a coordinated effort with the schools in co-located buildings, for sure. So more to come there.
Regarding, again, this is a DOE co-location question. Will any of the pre-approved construction be permitted in June? I assume this is coming from a school that must have been approved already.
I need more information on that, Corey. And would need to confer with like with Tom Taraco's team and others. So the best approach there is to email Tom's team. And if you need support in getting an answer, feel free to include us at charterschools@nyc.gov.
Great. And the last question I'll ask you is actually one that David can also maybe jump in on if he has anything, because this is a special education. Has there been any clarity around ICT programming, particularly if you're working in a hybrid model next year, where there would be some instruction in school or remote instruction, and how is that going to be? When should we anticipate, or when is that going to come? And I will just add that while this question goes to DOE, because they are the LEA for special education in New York City, we also are waiting on our SEA to provide guidance, as I'm sure Anjali would add.
That's right, Corey. We understand this is the hot question. I don't have anything to share here in terms of guidance. David, anything to add?
We don't have guidance. I think right now, however, to prepare for the release of guidance, and in the eventuality that will be in remote instruction next year, the best thing you can do is to think outside the box as to how you can provide remote support that most closely resembles what's on that IEP, and certainly work closely with your Committee on Special Education to help actualize that. I think oftentimes people are going to the CSE for bureaucratic reasons, but they're also content experts, and we encourage you to do that as well to the best of both of your abilities.
Great. And I'll just add one follow-up that came in was about what is the guidance that DOE is waiting on in terms of reconciling billing for this year. And I will just say that as an advocate and not the DOE is always going to have to say they are waiting on guidance because they are. What I will tell you as an advocate is that it has been our position is that based on all of the executive orders allowing the waiver of school days, we are intending that all schools, charter schools, will be held harmless for the 1920 school year, and so that the reconciliation will not have to happen. I think specifically schools have been concerned about special education billing in the last 3 months because services have been slightly different than when you were in school. But again, it is our position that unless there is something that comes out of SED to say otherwise, which we have only seen guidance confirming that schools will be held harmless at this point, we were hoping that there is nothing else schools will have to do. But it is something that DOE always has to say, and so we ask the question.
Well, not to speak for anyone, but I will say that Anjali calls me and texts me and emails me almost every day saying, David, we need to get in touch with these people at SED. When is information coming out? So, everyone advocates in their own way.
Anything else to add, Anjali? Are we good to hand it back to you, Amika? We're almost out of time.
Nothing to add. Just one quick thing that I want to announce to the group. So I just put a link in the chat to our Google Doc where we're collecting reopening questions. Please submit your questions there. We have We are taking a look at this to not only help inform guidelines and policies internally, but also it helps our thinking to know what you need. However, I want to differentiate, right? So for these Tuesday calls, you should continue sort of the same guidance that Yomika shared in terms of submitting your questions, sending questions in the Q&A and in the chat so that everyone can see what your questions are. But we would also love if you can submit your questions in the Google Doc as well. That is the last thing I had, Corey.
Great, thank you. Back to you, Yomika.
All right, great, thank you. Thank you, everyone, as always, for joining us on Tuesdays. We will see you next Thursday for remote hiring with Selected. Have a good day. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.